I'm joined by one of the most notable radio hosts here in Houston, host of Payne and Pendergast on SportsRadio 610, home of the Houston Texans, my good friend Sean Pendergast. How are you doing, Sean?
I'm doing good, Manav. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Really glad to connect with you. I know it's been some time, but, really excited to talk about the draft. Of course, the Texans having the second overall pick, the 12th overall pick. Lots to talk about the quarterbacks here. Who should the Texans get, whether they should get a quarterback, and CJ Stroud or Bryce Young. We've heard this debate quite a bit, but I want to hear your thoughts on CJ Stroud. People think he's the safest option, but I'm wondering if he's going to end up being a big difference maker. I remember earlier in the season, your tweets about how you're saying Stroud wasn't it as a prospect. What are your thoughts if the Texans were able to get him at 2, and if you think he would be able to bring the Texans to greatness?
Yeah, I'm anybody who listens to the show, as I know you do, knows that I'm a Bryce Young guy. Like I want them to get Bryce Young, and I'm sure you and I are going to talk about Bryce as well. Mm-hmm. He just had his pro day, just a short time before you and I recording this. But I've come around more on CJ Stroud as the season ended. The playoff game against Georgia, obviously, he did some things in that game that I had not yet seen him do against good competition. That was very encouraging to me. His ability to kind of improvise a little bit, maneuver the pocket, not be so robotic with things. So from that standpoint, and watching him go through this process and getting to hear him more and learn more about him personally, the importance of football, kind of what you start to envision what he would be like as the face of your franchise. I think he's a pretty good prospect. I don't know that there's any safe prospect. I don't know if there's ever any safe prospects. Yeah. Even Trevor Lawrence. It took him a while to get out of first gear. So I think each of these prospects, not just Stroud and Young, but obviously Levis and Richardson, those seem to be the big four. They've all got their warts, whether it's Bryce's size or, Stroud. I think most of the criticism with Stroud is just the things he didn't do as a quarterback in terms of, being able to maneuver and improvise and make plays. But I've gotten to the point where if Carolina does indeed use the first pick on Bryce Young, I'm at like a 6 or a 7 right now on a scale of 1 to 10. As far as like, I call it the talk myself into scale. I'm at like a 6 or a 7 on CJ Stroud. I think training camp would be really exciting. I think he for sure would be the starting quarterback for this team. I think having Case Keenum there for either of those guys I think Case Keenum there for either of those guys and Laramie Tunsil locked down as the left tackle for either of those guys makes the Texans situation a really, really good one for whichever quarterback they end up taking.
Yeah, I think the situation here is solid for which either young quarterback comes into here. And, we were talking about Bryce Young. With the Panthers trading up, I'm not sure. Some people were saying maybe they take CJ Stroud. There was this thing on Twitter where, the Panthers were talking to CJ Stroud and it seemed like they might be picking him or something of that sort at his pro day. I don't know, but, for me, I just think Bryce Young is going to go number 1. I think he's a good quarterback. I'd love him on the Texans, but, not having that number 1 pick doesn't give us the full control of that. But I think I'm more concerned about, I've seen people more concerned about his weight compared to his height. I think they were saying he throws taller than he actually is. So I think both of them are pretty enticing, but you think Stroud could go number 1 or, is it seeming like Young could?
Well, I think either could. The odds makers think that it's CJ Stroud right now. The odds makers have CJ Stroud as a pretty heavy favorite to go to the Carolina Panthers. Yeah. I have no idea how much validity there is to that. The one thing that they keep citing is Frank Reich, who's the head coach of the Panthers now. They cite the body types of the quarterbacks that he's had before, Andrew Luck and Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers and guys like that, Carson Wentz. Yeah. The thing I would say about that is, there's been so few guys that are Bryce Young size. Go find me the coach other than Cliff Kingsbury and Pete Carroll who have handpicked a quarterback that size. There's teams are handpicking 6'4" guys by the bushel, and so I don't know that, like, I look at Frank Reich and go, well, he's got a type. It's like, well, no, he's just happened to be one of like dozens and dozens of coaches who have always had guys that are 6'3" to 6'5", somewhere in there. So I don't know. I don't buy into like that necessarily Frank Reich has a type when it comes to quarterbacks. I could see though where Bryce Young's stature would be worrisome to some teams, where him only being barely 200 pounds and playing in the NFL
Yeah.
would be worrisome. And yet most of the experts I see have Bryce at the top. It's weird because most of the experts have Bryce at the top of their board. And yet the odds makers think that CJ Stroud is a lock to become the Panthers quarterback. So it's got to be something about what Reich likes in there. I don't put too much validity now, a day later, into the interaction that CJ Stroud was having with the Panthers brass at his pro day, because Bryce Young basically had the same interaction with them today at his pro day, and my guess is when they go to Lexington tomorrow and talk to Will Levis, you and I are recording this on Thursday, where Lexington on Friday is the Will Levis pro day. My guess is they're not going to shun Will Levis there. It's not like they were nice to Bryce Young and nice to CJ Stroud. And when Will Levis comes walking over, they're like, yeah, all right, bro, whatever. Like they're going to be nice to him too. Yeah. And so nobody's going to know anything. I'm just keeping fingers crossed that they really like CJ Stroud more than Bryce Young. Bryce gives me more hope than CJ does, but I'd be cool with either of them.
Yeah, I'm at this point where I'm good with either. I'm happy with both. I think at this point, I personally want a quarterback. I want to get that situation, that position solidified. Yeah. But I'm curious, I'm really enticed by Will Anderson and what he brings. If you were going to draft him, would you take him at 2, or would you just stick with a quarterback based on the situation?
No, I'd stick with the quarterback, and I think that's what they're going to do too. Okay. I think Will Anderson he's a good prospect. It's funny, after his freshman and sophomore year, he was getting touted like he was a generational type of prospect. Mm-hmm. But like a lot of these guys, like because you have to stay 3 years, that gives them another year to kind of nitpick. It's almost like guys reach their peak, and then if they have to stay in college any longer, then there's no finding other good things about them. It's now about finding the things that are not as good about them. So now this year, it's like, well, he can play. He can't play with his hand in the dirt. No, he's a little small, and he's this or that. Like last year, he was the next the next Khalil Mack or whatever. And now he's got this wart or that wart. He's still going to go top 5. I just want a quarterback more than I do an edge rusher at this point. I've done these last 2 years with Davis Mills and Kyle Allen and Tyrod Taylor, and I need hope at the position again, Manav. I need hope at the position.
Yeah, I 100% agree too. And I've been looking at these mock drafts, and people have the Texans at 12, assuming they don't trade up, taking these outside linebackers or pass rushers. I saw Nolan Smith. I like that guy. I think Miles Murphy as well. These guys, defensive linemen, going at 12. Obviously, wide receiver would be great. I've seen Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, Najiba, if I'm pronouncing his name right, from Ohio State, and Quinton Johnson, he's dropped. But would you take a defensive lineman, or would you prefer a receiver at 12?
I prefer a receiver. I've been a big Quentin Johnston guy. It seems like his stock has kind of fallen lately in the eyes of a lot of people, and it seems like Jackson Smith and Jigba's stock has gone up. It's almost like those two have flip-flop positions, and somewhere in between is Jordan Addison, and Zay Flowers is this fast horse coming up on the outside of the track, for the kid from Boston College. So there's some interesting names there. I have a hard time getting into, is he worth it at 12? They should trade back and he'll still be there, blah, blah, blah. I think it'd be exciting to give whichever quarterback they draft a weapon to go with it. I think it would be really cool. I wouldn't be angry if they took a tight end at 12, although, signing Dalton Schultz this year at least kind of probably pushes that down maybe slightly. But I would like them to take a receiver. But if they took a defensive player, I wouldn't, I'll be at the draft party. You know what I mean? And like last year, I will say, like last year when they took Kenyon Green, I was like, a guard at 15, no disrespect to all the interior offensive linemen out there. It's not a sexy position, and it's not helping that Kenyon Green didn't have a good rookie year. That's not helping right now either, with still trying to process all that. I was a Kyle Hamilton guy with that pick last year. So I'm not anti-defense. Offense would just be more exciting to have, like another shiny toy for the quarterback. But there's some good defensive guys there that if they took, I think he's going to move back. If you want to know the truth, like I put a poll up on Twitter a couple hours ago.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'll read it here, and I want to see what your vote was or what it would be if you voted, because it's pretty even right now among 3 of the 4 choices. But the poll was on Twitter at Sean Pendergast. Assuming it is a QB at 2, what do you think Caserio will do with the 12th overall pick? Not what you want him to do, but what your prediction is as to what he will do. Wide receiver, best defensive player available, trade up, trade down. Trade up is by far 4th place, only 5%.
Yeah.
The other 3 are almost evenly split, like 31, 31, and 33% among the other 3 choices. What would your prediction be, Manav?
I think it's really enticing. I mean, I think I would go with you and go down it. I mean, that just seems more like him.
Yes.
So, I mean, probably, but defensive player is good with me as well. I mean, honestly, I just trust Caserio at this point. He knows better than.
Oh, I trust him. Whatever he does, I'm fine with. But as far as what I think he will do, I think he's going to trade down from.
Yeah,
12.
it just seems more like that would be.
Even if it's trading from 12 to 14 to pick up like a 5th round pick, I feel like he would. I feel like he just likes rejiggering things like that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you think they should do at center? I mean, that's been a question. They have a hole there, and I think they need to fill that up somehow. Yeah,
I mean, they need somebody. There's still a few bodies out there in free agency. I know they signed this Michael Dieter guy from Miami earlier this week. He didn't start any games for the Dolphins last year, so I don't know how great I feel about him becoming anointed the starter for the Texans. Yeah. Although he's got to be better than Scott Quesenberry, would be my guess.
Yeah.
I think center. I think at 33 in the draft, if there's some centers there, that's an optimal spot to take a center. I think too, if you start to get to the middle of the 2nd round, I don't think Nick's going to be afraid to pull the trigger on moving up with one of those 3rd round picks if he wants to. It's what he did last year. He took Jalen Petrie at 37 with their pick, and then he moved up into the 2nd round to get John Mechie at 44. They moved from 66 up to 44 to go get Mechie. So I could see that if they still needed a center, a rookie center and a rookie quarterback, it'd be nice if they can grow together, but that doesn't really get me, that makes me a little nervous about the upcoming season, having rookies in both of those spots.
Yeah.
But it's this. I mean, this we can agree on. They need an upgrade at that position. Yeah. There's no question.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Texans have been really killing it during free agency. I've loved a lot of the moves that they've done. The team needs a lot of things, but they've done a great job in terms of linebackers. Tight end with Dalton Schultz, and I love Jimmy Ward on this team. Robert Woods was, I think, a great choice, and Devin Singletary. I mean, Caserio has been doing a great job in terms of this, and I know you guys had him on the show a while back. I mean, I guess what just stood out to you about that conversation you guys had in the direction the team is going in?
Yeah, I think, a few things with the conversation. One, I'm not surprised at all that he's not at either of these pro days. He was very clear in that conversation that, pro days were not necessarily his cup of tea, at least not, not to the point where they move the needle or move the grade any type of way on quarterbacks. It's very, 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 very choreographed. I don't like my big takeaway with Nick, just in general with that conversation. There were a lot of nuggets from that conversation that, we've kind of repurposed, talking about Laramie Tunsil and the Brandon Cook situation and things like that. My general sense with Nick is it feels like he's kind of a little more easygoing over the last few months. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's a coincidence I know he was close with Jack Easterby and Jack's not there anymore. I don't know how that was to navigate for him with as unpopular as Jack was and him being kind of attached to Jack. I don't know what that dynamic was like for Nick. But I know in the building as a whole, Jack not being there probably is a big relief for a lot of people. But I think the hiring of D'Amico, I think him having a head coach where coming in and chopping it up every day with D'Amico Ryans is probably something that's stimulating to him. Mm-hmm. D'Amico's a really, really smart dude, obviously, a former really, really good football player too, who probably has a lot of different thoughts than Nick on things, on roster building and player evaluation, which I think Nick probably welcomes, I think that's intellectually stimulating for him to have somebody in there with a different point of view, and they debate and discuss things and then arrive at conclusions for things. So that's my biggest takeaway, Manav, is not necessarily like one or two things that we talked about. It's that I feel like Caserio's like in a really good place right now. He's going to get a quarterback here. They've got their left tackle locked down. It's got he had money to spend. He spent it well. The vibe around the team seems to be pretty good these days. His bosses, I think, are happy with the job that he's doing. And he's got a head coach that not only he connects with, but boy, a lot of people really do like this guy. And every other team that wanted a head coach wanted D'Amico Ryans, and the Texans are the ones that got him. So that's probably my biggest takeaway.
Yeah. I just like that overall feeling about having, just a sense of calm, and that the team is doing good and heading in the right direction.
Yeah, they need to win. I mean, he's look, like anytime we do even straight close to praising him about stuff, and he's on with us, he's very quick to point out like they've not won nearly enough football games. I don't think he's given himself any flowers at all. Like, my guess is he's really hard on himself, and he probably feels like he's not done a good job because they've only won 7 games in 2 seasons right now. And he's partly responsible for that. Nobody's saying he should have won the Super Bowl, but Vegas said they were supposed to win 4.5 last year and 4.5 this year, and they haven't hit that target in either of those 2 seasons. You know what I mean? So, nobody recognizes more that there's still a ton of work to do than Nick. But I obviously, as you pointed out, with free agency and with the draft coming up, things definitely feel like they're on the uptick right now.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to see the results on the field for sure to, confirm that. I feel like even last year too, there was a good vibe, I guess you could say, after the draft, but then, we saw the season, and, you want to see it on the field as well. And I think it all starts at D'Amico Ryans. Of course, it was such a great hire, and, absolutely love that. And I think it's really going to take the Texans in the right direction. But, I want to hear your thoughts about, Bobby Slowick and Matt Burke, those 2 coordinators. I mean, I feel like Bobby Slowick is, a bit unproven in terms of, coordinating offenses. He's had some experience in San Francisco, but, what do you think about the 2 coordinators and where those 2 can lead the team?
I think, Slowick or anybody, whoever it was, I'm glad they're bringing somebody in off of the tree with that offense. And it's not O'Brien's offense like it was with Tim Kelly or with O'Brien when he was here. It's not whatever whatever Pep Hamilton was trying to do last year. I don't know what that was. It's the offense that more and more teams are kind of adopting as the base offense. And then Slowick, I'm sure, will put his twist on it. Not everybody runs that same. A lot of teams run that offense, but some teams do it. The Rams do it with a heavy emphasis on the passing game. The Niners have done it with a heavy emphasis on the run game. Some teams do it in between. It'll be interesting to see what direction the Texans go with it. But I like that it's that version of an offense. As Seth likes to call it, the Coop Shanastani offense, a combination of Kubiak and Shanahan. So as far as Slowick himself goes, I know as much about him as anybody who's read up on him knows about him. I've not had a chance to meet him or talk to him. I trust D'Amico Ryans' assessment of him. He's the one that's been around him for 5 years now. Everybody who's come across him says the dude is super smart and pretty creative and things like that. So I'm excited for him. I'm excited for Gerard Johnson, he's real close with John Lopez, our midday host, who I know you've had on your show before. Gerard kind of grew up around John's family up there in Humble. Gerard, I think, is viewed as a rising star in the coaching business. So that'll be good for whatever young quarterback comes in. I think that'll be really good for them. As far as the defensive side of the ball, again, I only know about Matt Burke, what I've seen from his resume and from what I've seen in the interviews. He sounds like a super interesting guy. Just in terms of his spare time and the things that he does. I liked his press conference. I liked his overall vibe. I think on the defensive side of the ball, it's probably safe to assume that D'Amico is still going to have a pretty big hand in things. I don't know if he's going to call the plays or not. They've not made that clear yet. But the defensive side, it's always with any team. I'm more intrigued by, as far as coordinators go, I'm always more intrigued by the coordinator who doesn't share the same side of the ball as the head coach. You know what I mean? Like when Bill O'Brien was the head coach, it was always more intriguing about Romeo Crennel or Anthony Weaver or Mike Vrabel than it was about George Godsey or Tim Kelly or whoever, because we knew it was O'Brien's offense they were running and calling plays and things, like, for the most part, calling plays. So Burke, Burke seems like a good dude. I'm excited about it. They need, they've upgraded the talent for him as well. So we'll see where it goes. And Frank Ross, the special teams coordinator, they brought him back. I like Frank a lot. I think Frank's done a great job. So that's a thumbs up as well.
Yeah, definitely. Special teams coordinator. He does a great job. And, I'm excited as well for the team, just a whole new look and vibe. So, I really want to ask, do you think the Texans could have gotten more back for Brandon Cooks? And I saw that trade and I was like, I still think he's a good wide receiver in this league. And, he's going to help out the Cowboys quite a bit. So, you think they could have gotten more from him? I was kind of looking at that and I was like,
they could have, they would have, that was what was on the table. I think with Brandon, and I know you've had Brandon on the show too, so I know he's a friend of your show. I think it was tough because Brandon had a rough season last year, just from production standpoint. I don't think it was all his fault. Like, I think Brandon still has a lot left in the tank. I don't think he's shot, I don't think he's washed or anything like that. I think it had more to do with the offense than it did with Cooks last year. But it was a bad look when he went away from the team for a week in the midway through the season at the trade deadline. His contract is not a great contract. That was a miss by Nick, that contract. And the Texans really weren't dealing from a position of strength. Everybody knew they wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to dump him.
Yes.
So, and even with all that said, I was still disappointed that they only got a 5th and a 6th for him. I thought, especially looking at some of the conjecture during free agency, because this was not a great free agency class for wide receivers. Like the top ones were like Allen Lazard and Jacoby Myers went for like $11 million a year each. And I think Brandon Cooks I think he's better than both those guys, at least on par with both of those guys. So when they were getting that much, I'm like, okay, well, some team will give up a 3rd for Brandon Cooks, like he's more accomplished than both of those guys.
Yeah.
And so I was a little disappointed. It was a 5th and a 6th, and that they had to pay $6 million of the salary. I think there's probably part of it where you reach a point where you're like, all right, well, we're ready to move on.
Just move on.
Yeah. So I wish they got more than a 5th and a 6th.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was tough. I think he's a great guy to talk to. I had a great time talking with him, and I wish him all the best in Dallas. I think he's going to do a great job over there. I just don't think it just didn't work out. And Texans were like, you got to let him go, and contract. I think that's why they only got that much for him. But But overall, I like the moves that they made, and I think the Texans are on the right track. But I know you're at the Astros spring training this month, so I want to talk about. How was your experience over there, and what I guess stood out to you during your time there?
It was amazing. I'd never been to spring training before. This was my first time, so it was really, really cool. I'm definitely going back next year. I don't know if we're going back as a station, but I'm going to go back. My wife is already all over me to go. She's never been either, and I kept texting her the whole time. I'm like, we got to come here, non-business next year. We got to come here as fans next year because it's so fun. It really is. Have you been to the Sugarland Space Cowboys game before?
Yeah, I've been to one.
It's a lot like that, but with major league players. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of a minor league ballpark, but a nice one. Like even nicer than Constellation Field, I think. And it's just great. It's laid back. All those teams in that part of the country that play spring training against each other. It's the Grapefruit League, so they. There's a handful of teams that all play in that South Florida area there. And so the days where they weren't playing at the Astros ballpark, they were playing either, 20 minutes away in Jupiter at St. Louis, or 40 minutes away up in Port St. Lucie against the Mets. So it was just a really, really neat vibe down there. All those little small minor league ballparks where all the spring trainings are going on. As far as the Astros themselves go at spring training, the big thing we were watching that week, because it was the first week of games.
Yeah.
So the big thing we were watching that week was the application of the new rules, right?
Yeah.
The pitch clock, the hitter, the pitch clock, which is also kind of essentially a hitter's clock as well. They have to be in the batter's box and things like that. So that was the big thing we were watching. So I was encouraged by some of the things we saw. Luis Garcia looked like he was adapting fine.
Yeah.
The pitchers looked like they were adapting fine. The hitters, here and there, our guy Jose Altuve was having a rough go of it while we were there, and now he's got this injury that he's dealing with as well. So, anyways, but it was really cool. Look, I'm super optimistic about the year. I don't like the fact that it feels like they're dealing with a ton of different nagging sort of things between varying degrees of nagging. Like McCullers is, that's worrisome. Hunter Brown, back tightness, Kyle Tucker fouling a ball off his foot, Jordan's hand, all those, Brantley's shoulder, like it feels like they're, for the first time in a while, they're kind of going into the season with a whole lot of stuff, and so we'll see how that plays out. But I think that they're too talented not to make the postseason and win the division again. They have too many weapons.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about them. Injuries obviously is an issue. Jordan, and then seeing Jose with that thumb, that was, obviously pretty scary to watch. But, I think, after his surgery, I think he'll be back. I feel like late June, maybe July, somewhere around there. But
it's 8 weeks until he can resume baseball activities. So that'll put us in mid-May, late May, right? Like around May 20th or so.
Yeah. And then I think it's time to, get back into things,
Yeah. He'll have to rehab have to probably go to Sugar Land for a spell, which will be fun, but I wish he were playing for the Astros. Yeah. June sounds about right. Like if he makes it back before the All-Star break, I think that'll be good. Yeah,
for sure. And, you mentioned the pitch clock and stuff, concerned about him, getting used to that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. He missed it. The World Baseball Classic, they weren't using the pitch clock. So he's going to have to get used to that. This could be one of those years, like kind of like 2020 was for Altuve. When you look at his career stats, I'm sure you go, you're probably a baseball reference guy. You look, you're looking up stats and you look and you go, wow, this guy is a Hall of Famer every year. Ooh, except 2020. What the hell happened? He hit 219. It was a COVID year. Yeah. But this could be one of those years where like, okay, he played 80 games and he batted 242 and all right. Yeah. And then he'll be back to being fifth in the MVP voting next year again, so that's what he does. Yeah. I think, he'll be fine. I think it's just a matter of the team, they're dealing with stuff, but as long as they get into the postseason and they're healthy, then, they'll go on a roll again. The team's just so good. I mean, even though McCullers, the pitching is good. Abreu's been a great signing for the team. I think he's going to work out really, really well. So yeah, I mean, I just think, I know they're having some problems, but I like the way the Astros are heading in. I'm talking with you, Sean. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Love your talk on the Texans. So, great catching up with you. And I'll talk to you maybe sometime soon again. Absolutely, Manav. Keep up the great work, man. Keep doing your thing. And we'll catch up between now and the draft for sure. Yeah, for sure. All right, man. It was great talking.